Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. We have Arjun, our senior content, who will guide us through today's topic that is React hooks and state management. Get ready for a great learning experience. Now, over to you, Arjun.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining this webinar. So today in this webinar, we will going to be talking about hooks and state management in React. So let me share my screen first. So is my screen visible to all? So I think it's visible.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
Arjun.
it's visible.
Okay. So today I am going to talk about hooks and state management in React. So if we talk about what will we cover in this session, we will going to talk about React hooks, like use state hook, use effect hook, use ref hook, and there are many other hooks we will going to talk about. And then we will going to talk about React component lifecycle. After that, we will use context API in React and see the implementation, how we can implement it in React. After that, we will see how we can use reducer hook with context API to manage state. So we will start with the React hooks. So basically, React hooks such as use state and use effect allows you to manage state and side effects directly within the functional component, making your code more concise and easier to understand. Hooks enable functional component to have features previously only available in class component, such as lifecycle methods and state management, thus promoting the use of functional component throughout the React application. So we have some hooks like use state hook, use effect hook, use ref hook. And there are other hooks like use context, use reducers, use callback, use memo, and many other. So the most used hooks are these three: use state, use effect, and use ref. Sorry for the numbering. So this must be three and four. So we will see what is use state hook. So the use state hook lets you add state to functional component, and it returns two values: state variable and a state update function. So as you can see, this is the simple syntax of a use state hook, where we have defined a use state hook where we have passed a initial value in it, and it is returning a array which have two values, state and set state. So let me share you the screen with an example. So I have made a component. Use This is the example of use state hook. So is my VS Code visible to all?
Yes, Arjun.
Okay. So as you can see, I have defined, first we have to import the use state hook from React, and then you have to use it inside your function. This is your functional component use state example. And here, as you can see, we have a initialized use state with 0. So what will happen? This 0 will be initialized to this state. This count is a state. This is which is a current value, and set state is a function that allows you to update that state. So when you do this, it's like in variable, which you can access in your JSX element, like here, count, and we have two buttons right here. So first button is to increment and second button is to decrement. So what is it is doing? When you click on increment button, this will call a arrow function. This is here, and we are setting count and passing a value count plus 1. So initially it has a 0 count, so that means it will be 0 initially. So 0 plus 1 is will be 1. So that will update the state count to 1, and it will be displayed here 1. And you again click on the button, it will update a next state. So right now the state is 1, and it will add 1 to 1, which will be 2. So it will display 2. And same for the decrement. We are we are subtracting it 1 from the count. So it will decrease the count. So let me show it on to the screen. So we will start. Before starting, we have to import this component into the app component. Use state example. So we have imported it, and now we will start the server npm run dev. So as you can see here, we have a count which is displaying the count state, and two buttons to increment and decrement. So when I click on increment, this function inside use state example will run this command, and which is doing it, it will increase the count to 1 plus 1. And if I click on decrement, it will decrement the count to minus 1. So as you can see, if I click on increment, it is increasing, and when I click on decrement, the state is decreasing. So this is how the use state works. So next we have a use effect hook. So you, so before heading to use effect, let me explain you how React component lifecycle works. So in the React, the component lifecycle refers to the sequence of events that happens from the moment a component is created, mounted. Hold on, just a second. Okay, so where I was. Uh, so let me start it again. In the React, the component lifecycle refers to the sequence of events that happens from a moment component is created. That means component is mounted until it is removed from the DOM. That means it was unmounted. These life cycle phases is essential for effective management, state side effects, and optimizing component performance. So there are three phases of component life cycle. The first stage, first phase is mounting phase. So when the component is created and is being added to the DOM, this phase is called mounting phase. Then the component is re-rendered due to changes in the props or state. That phase is called updating phase. After updating phase, if the component is removed from the DOM, that phase is called unmounting phase. So let's start again with the use effect. So here we have a use effect. So the use effect hook is one of the most powerful and commonly used hooks in React. It allows you to perform side effects in functional component, such as data fetching, subscribing to events, or manual updating the DOM. So it basically has this syntax where you can write your side effect code, and this return function right here, it's called callback function. So the first argument in the callback function that contains the side effects that you want to run, and in the array you can see here the second argument is an array of dependencies that determines when the side effect should be run. So let's see it with an example. I have created a component use effect example. Here I have defined a state, which is a second and set seconds function. So as you can see, I have initialized it with 0, but I have not passed a type to it. So here what is happening when you initialize some value to this use state, it will infer the type of value that it has been initialized. So that means it we have passed 0, this will automatically be inferred as number type. So that is why it is not showing any error, because it implicitly infer the type of this initialized value, which is 0, a number. So after initializing the state, we have defined a use effect hook. So you have to import it from the React. After importing, you have to type use effect. After use effect, you have to type a callback function, which is being defined here. So this is called a callback function, and inside it we have write a logic to set the interval. So what this interval do is, when you set the interval, it will uh, it will store the set interval mm, current state to the interval variable. And when you write this, so this set seconds will run after every 1 second. So when first it will run, it will initialize, I mean, it will update the state to previous plus 1. The previous state was 0, which has been initialized to the state second. So it will update the state with plus 1 after every 1 second. So this is a set interval which is running. After this, we have returned clear interval. So what it will do when the component unmount, that means when this component closes, or it is being unmount or removed from the DOM, this will clear the interval that we have defined here. So this is how use effects work. And one more thing, after the callback function, we have write a empty array. So what does this do is, when we have dependencies and want to re-render the component when any state changes in entire component, we will just define those dependencies here. So when you define these dependencies here, so whenever those dependencies changes, the whole this function re-render, or it is being re-executed after every updation in those dependencies. So this is how use effect work. So let me use this to show you how it works. We will import it from the component and refresh. This will update on the, so as you can see here, our timer is started, and when I refresh it, the component is unmounted from this browser. As you can see, it will restart. So you can see it, the interval is being cleared. So this was all about use effect hook. Now we will see how we can manage state in React using context API. So when using context API in React, so it is a feature used to share state or data across multiple components without having to pass props down manually at entry level. That means to avoid prop drilling. As you can see on the left hand side, there are three components: app, user info. So there's some state defined in app component, which we want to use in users component and user info component. But to use them, you have to pass it into the props to user. And if you want to use the state in user info, then you have to again pass the those props into the user info. But this way, their dependencies might increase, and it will re-render the components unnecessarily. And this thing is called prop drilling, where you pass props to multiple components. Whereas if we use context, this will define a global state that we can access it from anywhere. Like we have defined the state in the context, we, and if we want to use it in user info, we can use it from directly from context. Otherwise, i- if you want to use in user or app, we can also use it from the context API. So when to use the context API, you might think. So when you have global data that many components need to access, like this one, user and user info, both of them want to use the same data. So we will use context APIs. So there are many things like theme, user authentication, language settings that that might be uh, that might be necessary in other components. So to avoid prop dealing and use a global data into your other components, you can use context APIs. So basically, there are three basic steps or basic things in context API. First one is context. It is an object created by React create context which holds a value that components can subscribe to. Let me show you with an example. So in the context folder, I have defined two files. First one is counter context and a counter reducer. So let's look into the counter context file. Here we have used a create context. So what does it do? It holds the value that component can subscribe to. So here we have defined which is imported from React, and we have also defined its type, which is here, which will contain basically uh, two values, state and dispatch, which have their own types. Like state has state type, which is coming from reducer. We will see what is in the counter reducer. So as you can see, we are defining create context and storing it into the context variable. So this is a counter context. After creating the counter context, we have to define a counter reducer, which I have defined it in the counter reducer file. So here, what it is doing, we have exported a function where we have only have two parameters. First one is state and other one is action. So state has its own type, which is state. Basically, it will contain a count, which will be going to have a number type, and other is action. So action, you can define any action here. Like we will try to use a reset type also. Right now, we have defined just two types here, increment and decrement. So when we click on increment, it will increment the count plus one, and we will use, if we use decrement, it will increase the count to minus one, decrease the count to minus one, sorry. So we have initialized the state here. So first we will have count to zero, which will be of state type. And inside this function, we have used switch. So whenever the action type will be increment, this function will return this will return this object, which means it will return a count where we are setting state.count, we are accessing the previous value, or you can say we are accessing the global count and incrementing it by 1 here. And same for the decrement, we are subtracting -1 from the count. And otherwise, if we don't get any type, it will just return state, whatever it is right now. So let's look into the create counter context. So as you can see, we are calling counter reducer function and passing it into our context provider. So we have created the counter context, and then we have created the counter reducer. We have to create a function counter provider. So what it will do, it will provide this count state to every component inside to every component that will be inside of this counter provider. So first we have used a use reducer state, which where we have passed counter reducer and initial state. So you might think why to combine use reducer with context API. So while use state works great for simple state management, use reducer is better suited for complex state management where the next step depends on the previous one. And state management with multiple actions, similar like Redux operates when you want to handle state updates in structured way using reducers. So this is the um, cause we are using a use reducer with the context APIs. And how use reducer works. So use reducer is a React hook that takes a reducer function. So this is a reducer function. We are passing it inside it and an initial state. So we have reducer function and an initial state. Initial state was let me show you what was the initial state. So this was the initial state we have defined, and we are importing it to our counter context and passing it in our use reducer hook, which will give an array of two values, a state and a dispatch. So state will be where we can access our data, and dispatch will be where we can use the functions that is being used to change update to the states. And after that, we are returning context counter context dot provider where we are passing values, state and dispatch and the children here. So let's use this counter provider into our app.tsx. So this is defined already. So this is how we will wrap the counter component inside counter provider. If you want to use those states, you have to wrap your components inside this provider. So if I save the file, and inside the counter component, this counter component, we have a counter and two buttons to increment and decrement the count. So what it is using, we are using our custom hook from here, and we are updating directly from this component. And we can now use this state in other state also. Like, let me just show you how we can do it. Consumer dot tsx. We will use the same hook, import it, state dot count. So just like this, we will import it in our app.tsx. So after importing it, let's go into the website. So when I increase the counter, as you can see, this component is increasing the counter, but the changes are being reflected to this component as well. So that means our global data is working correctly, and our context API is giving us a global data, global state, which is being displayed here. So what if I use it outside this counter provider? Will it work? Let's see. So it will not work. If you click on inspection, so you can see here we are getting error use counter must be within counter provider. So you have to define it inside the counter provider. Now it will work fine. So that's it from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Hi Arjun.
Hi Arif.
Yeah, it was an informative session, and I also learned a lot about the hooks. So I just have one question, like what is the role of a provider in the context API?
So the provider component allows any child component to access the value provided by the context, just like I have defined here. I have defined a counter
Okay,
provider. Inside it, I have used counter component and consumer. So what will it do? It will provide state of count into this component and
okay,
uh, in consumer component also. As you can see, I'm importing it from use context hook, which is in the context API.
okay, got it.
Hi Arjun.
Hi Janvi.
Hi. So I have a question that how can I consume context in React?
To consume the context in React, you can use context inside the functional component. If I open this counter context, this here we have defined a custom hook, and we are using use context here to get the context and returning the context to to the component the that are inside that are wrapped inside the context provider. So this is how we are using the use context.
Okay, thank you.
Hi Arjun.
Hi Ankit.
Uh, Thank you for this conducting this webinar to learn about the React. But I have a question for you because I'm a little bit confused. Actually, why splitted user logic into a separate file? Can you provide some?
So okay, I have splitted this code counter reducer from the counter uh, context is because when you split it, it helps to keep the code clean and modular and easier to maintain as the application grows. So if you want to create a context folders or reducer folder, it will be great, which will keep the code clean and modular.
Okay, okay, Arjun. Thank you.
Thank you.